Okay, guys, what are we doing here today? We got the Hotrod Homelite XL76. Let's give you guys another close-up. I want to talk about this saw, and we got to do a little bit of work to it. I'm going to tell you what it's doing and how I propose to fix it. Look at these guys. Willie did such an awesome job. And again, this is a factory recreation of a Homelite bar. If anybody's curious, that's actually what they look like. They were round on one side and flat on the other. So, I think you did a great job. Very happy. Okay, let's put you back on the mount. And we got to do a little bit of work to this saw today. So, if any of you guys that work on old saws know about this stuff. As with all old saws, even if they run good stock, when you port them, you create issues, right? Well, this is no different. This saw ran great stock. This thing's like brand new inside, low mile. I chose this as a build because of the condition of the saw. It's so nice inside. Typical homeowner saw. Spent more time sitting on a bench. Okay. This being an XL76 has the 3-shoe clutch on it. Well, for whatever reason, I believe, and this is a thing that I have a hypothesis that this clutch is having a hard time holding the power of this saw. I got to pull this clutch off, and we're going to try and put a different clutch on it, a bigger clutch, and see if it can handle the power. Basically, the symptom is to get this thing to idle without the chain spinning, I have to turn the idle down so low that it's loading up with fuel. With the amount of timing tweaks and work I've done to this saw, it needs to idle a smidge faster. And if your clutch has a weak spring or weak springs in it at all, and you got to turn the idle up, well, guess what? Your chain's spinning. And yeah, you can put the chain brake on, but then the saw loads up with fuel and dies. I've played with the metering lever on this. It is low. It is at factory specs or a smidge lower. I still have to turn the idle up on this saw. So I'm going to try and swap the clutch and see if we can remedy the problem. Because really, you don't want to be walking around with a chain that's spinning. So let me get some tools going on here, and we're going to rip this clutch off. I'll be right back, guys. I actually just put the factory washer on, 2 screws, and I used this piece of channel, and I just pulled on it, and it came right off. So if you don't have a Homelite clutch puller, which I do not, just do it that way. It comes right off. So just want to show you guys a few of the little pro tricks. Okay, so this clutch is giving me trouble, so I'm going to just try and put a bigger clutch on it or a different clutch. I have 10 or 12 clutches here, so why not try a different clutch, right? If we can get a clutch that'll idle at a couple hundred RPM higher, let's do it. If not, we can modify the springs, but doing that can be a little bit tough. So I'm just putting the screws back in here, guys. Doing that can be tough, and I have done it on other saws to get your RPM right. Otherwise, the chain doesn't start moving until a higher RPM. So here you guys go. Just thought I'd show you. I'm going to rip a clutch off another saw and try a different clutch on here. Okay, guys, I ripped a clutch off of an XL130 Super, and there are some differences. The XL76 is a smaller clutch, but it has a bigger bearing in it. Let's see if you guys can see this. 76 bearing, 130 Super bearing. But the 130 Super is a way bigger clutch. So I was like, oh, we got different cranks in these, but we actually do not. These are bushed differently. Again, smaller bushing and a bigger bushing. So the 130, if you're going to swap clutches, there's a different spacer. The 130 spacer is thicker. I'm going to bring you guys in here so you can see. Okay, the 130 has a different spacer. So you throw that in there. Different bushing. So then the bushing goes on there. You got your clutch needle there. I'm going to grab a little dab of grease. A little dab of grease here. There we go. Put a little grease on this. And so if you guys were going to put the bigger 130 clutch on a 76, it looks like, and again, I don't know everything, I just know when I'm coming in across, you would have to actually put all the accessories with the 130 clutch on here. Okay, so here's your clutch drum. I'm gonna clean this up real good. Now the 130 has a bigger clutch, but the springs in it has a single spring like an early Husqvarna. Those typically aren't my favorite. They can be very problematic. But let's see. I'm going to change the clutch on this saw and try it. If not, I have more clutches. But I thought the owner of this saw is going to run big long bars on it. I know that. So the bigger clutch might be just the ticket. I'm just spraying this clutch off because I'd prefer to not actually have to take it apart again. And we'll put this together like this. Now this is a big heavy clutch from the 130. So who knows, maybe we'll get a little bit more torque. Okay, put this on here. Now this is a clutch that you're going to want to really tighten down, because normally what I do in a clutch is I'll put the chain brake on, and I'll put the chain brake on and fire up the saw, and that will typically tighten up a clutch. This one I'm going to have to put a little rope in there. I'm going to have to put a little rope in here and tighten it down the old school way. See, she's tightening down right now. Now, yeah, this is actually jamming up on here. So we got, I think I forgot a spacer, guys. Hold on. Let's see what we got here. Okay. What are we missing? Let's have a look here. I have a feeling that I'm going to have to use this washer, which is off of this saw. Let's see. I believe this washer just spaces out this bushing. I think the bushing ends up being a little too proud here. Okay, so the bushing sticks out actually further now. And now what we're going to do, just having a look at this, guys. Also, this has two springs, inner and outer. Interesting. Husqvarnas typically only have one. So, this is a good saw, guys. Homelite knew what they were doing with this one. Yeah, they built a lot of saws that are kind of slugs, but for whatever reason, this clutch is not cooperating. So we're gonna have to see if we can make this work. Let's see what we got here. I wonder if that washer goes on there. Yeah, it does. For sure it does. There you go, guys. See? Trial and error. I do it too. I work on so many different brands of saws that, you know, typically what I'll do, if I have a bunch of, like, say, 266s to build, I'll build them all at the same time so that you remember the little tips and tricks for the build, because every saw is a little different. Every saw goes together different. Timing tricks, all that stuff. It's hard to be a master of all saws, and At least it is for me. I'm gonna grab my fancy Homelite clutch tool. I wonder if we can. Okay, so we gotta spin this around backwards. I don't want to take the recoil off, so what I'm doing there is the recoil only wants to go so far, right? So what I'm doing there is I'm actually, see if we can get this in there. I'm actually going past where the recoil grabs and then back around. I know, eh? This is high-tech stuff we're doing here. There we go. Okay, I'm going to reef this down good. Okay. Without breaking that screw off, preferably. Okay, let's take this out. Ooh, we almost broke that screw. Be careful, guys. That was close. I reckon this thing's tight now. You don't want your clutch flying off because I've had that happen. What saw did I build? 562. I'll never forget that. I've been working on that saw for months. This is before I was like building saws one after the other, and I got that saw all ready to go. It was clean and shiny, and I put all these new parts on it. I didn't tighten the clutch up enough. Well, I fired that saw up, and the clutch grenaded, went flying across the shop. All the parts went flying, and that was the end of that. I had to order a bunch of new parts for that saw. So it happens, guys. Happens to me. I don't know if you guys have ever done that, but and the other thing, when I first started out flywheels, I've had a few flywheels I didn't reef down enough and they come loose back in my early days, or sometimes in my later days. I always triple check the flywheel nut. Again, tips and tricks. I don't take myself too seriously, guys. So anything I can tell you, anything silly that I've done in saw building that'll help you, anything I can tell you, I'm going to do it, because whatever, we're all human, right? Even me. I'm just a guy working on saws. Same as a lot of you. A lot of you guys are working on saws. I think it's neat. I had quite a few emails with some of you guys, and it's cool. I'm interested in the things you guys are doing. Try and yak with you guys whenever I have time. It's this like I've said before, this is a lot of fun, and I enjoy being able to share what I know with you guys. Well, with any luck, we can turn the idle up on this saw and have a chain that doesn't spin. I think, if I remember correctly, the engagement's a little bit higher on this saw versus other Homelites. I think it takes a little more RPM to get this big heavy clutch moving. That's what I hope. Now remember, tighten these screws down good on this cover plate. I've had quite a few of these with clutch covers that have big grooves worn in them, and they've been overheated because these screws will back out in some saws and they will actually start rubbing. I've had two like that. I had two in a row like that, actually. Get it home, run the saw, and you think everything's fine, and it ends up, you end up having a serious problem. Especially if those screws break off. You need that cover to keep the spring in place. So, there you go. Wish I had smaller hands a lot of times, guys. I have a hard time getting my fingers into these tight spaces. So basically I'm just going to throw this thing back together and take it outside and warm it up and let it idle and see. I'm going to get it good and hot. See if I can turn the idle up on this saw and get it to idle 100 or 200 RPM faster, which is exactly what I need in this saw, I figure. Again, a lot of this stuff, guys, is a hypothesis. I'm not always sure what a saw is going to need. They're all different. Every saw I've ever built, most of them are going to run a little different. And so all you can do is make your best guess and do what you do. Right? Because you never know. At least I don't. Okay. Okay, I'm going to bar this thing back up, guys. And let's take it outside and run it a bit and see what it's going to do. If that doesn't work, we will put another clutch on here. I'll be right back. Hey guys, I just took this thing outside. So here's the idea. Some ported saws, because of the fueling requirements, when you turn them up hot, this is why a hot saw doesn't make a good work saw and vice versa. If you turn a saw up super hot, like this one is, super hot means you're really adjusting the timing numbers. Sometimes they want to idle a little faster. But here's the problem. Your factory clutch setup will often be too slow. Does that make sense? Your factory idle speed versus your clutch engagement will often be too slow. So what ends up happening, the saw wants to idle 100 to 200 RPM faster, but if you got weak clutch springs or just generally a clutch design that wants to engage early, you end up with a saw that you can either have it idle properly or the chain is spinning. And if you put the brake on it, it exacerbates the problem because it loads up with fuel. Okay, so the idea here is, I'm just going to get this saw started and watch it. It wants to idle now, but the chain doesn't want to spin. This thing's way too loud for me to chat with you guys. But you guys see that? It comes down from idle, nice and smooth and quickly. The chain stops spinning, and then it idles nicely when you get off the throttle. Another thing, your metering lever height is crucial on ported saws, and that is your needle and seat, how high that lever is. If it's too high, the saw can often... It'll get lots of fuel on top, but it won't idle. It'll load up. Loading up means it's overfueling and you get fuel puddling. That's how I understand it. It'll puddle fuel in the saw and eventually it'll just choke itself out. Okay? Now, on the other hand, if your metering lever's too low, it'll idle like a dream. But when you get it in the wood, it'll tend to lean out. Okay? So, porting saws, there's a lot of little things that go into it. It's not just the numbers. And that's why I'm of the idea that you need to be a pretty good mechanic, a saw mechanic, to even attempt porting saws. And the farther you go with the numbers, the more problems you're creating. Okay, so this metering lever, I had it too high to start with, and then I had it too low. It is at stock height now. The saw fuel's fine. This saw is tending to be overfuel, which is good. For my purposes, this is not meant to be a saw that's going to sit there and idle all day. I'm telling you that right now. This is meant to be a saw that gets on the pipe in the wood and you can turn it up. I don't know how high I can turn this thing up. I've never made it go lean yet, guys. And it's spinning, 14,000 RPM right now. So we got a stock metering height lever and we have a chain that doesn't spin with a slightly faster idle speed than stock. That's just what this thing wants. And we put a different clutch on it out of a 130 and it seems to be doing the trick. So there you guys go. Hey guys, I'm back in the shop now. Okay, I'm just showing you guys literally what you have to go through. Okay, after the easiest thing for me was porting this thing. The hardest part is getting it to run properly after. So I had to build a carburetor for this saw. I had to modify the reeds. I needed new gaskets for the intake because they were leaking. Metering lever height is very crucial in this saw. It will always get enough fuel. The way I ported it, it wants more fuel and it'll get it. But the problem is, how do you make it idle? So we got it to idle now, so I'm super, super happy with that. And another thing you guys can do, if you have a clutch that is racing, or you have a ported saw that you're having clutch issues, what you can do is cut. If it has a single spring, you can cut the spring shorter. I've done that and it works. But you have to be careful putting it back in. If you stretch it, you'll be worse than you started. Another thing you can do is, if you could find a saw with a similar clutch, look at the idle speed and all that, and see if you can find a clutch that maybe engages a little bit higher. And a lot of times you can find that in the specs. If you can find a saw with a similar size clutch that engages higher, often it'll have a stiffer spring. Okay, and you can actually take those springs, if they'll fit, and put them in your stock clutch and build a custom clutch. I've done a little bit of that in this. I've manipulated the springs and put a different clutch and all that kind of stuff. Again, guys, these builds are a labor of love. I love sharing them with you. I would love to do a few of these for you in the future. But I'm going to say, these builds take a lot of time, especially on these Homelites I'm finding. Now that I have a good recipe, I could recreate this saw, as long as I have spare clutches, carburetors, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm loving this. I hope I can continue to do these in the future. And this is a great saw. It's these are always, I always felt these are about the strongest, one of the strongest 60cc saws out of the book, or out of the box rather, but they always lacked RPM. Well, now I've created a state where I have RPM and torque. So, but again, idling problems. I could make this thing idle, but the chain was, you know, doing this. So, I mean, we don't want that in a saw, right? That's dangerous. If it falls forward and it keeps spinning, you're digging your chain in the dirt. So you turn it down a bit, but now you have a saw that won't idle. It keeps dying. Well, what good is that, right? So, especially if you're falling. If you're falling and you cut into the tree and you have to stop, and your saw won't idle, your saw's going to die. You're going to have to start it. Like, that's a pain. So, I I guess I'm a little bit picky with these kinds of things, guys. A lot of guys wouldn't care, but I do. I'm going to keep curing this stuff and keep working on it. I just feel like I hate giving up when it's like, well, it doesn't idle the best, but it sure cuts wood. And this thing does, but it's like, maybe we can make it idle. It starts good, and when you put this thing in the wood, it delivers every time. It oils like crazy. I'm really happy with it, but the idling was kind of... So, and each one of these that I've built has been a different set of timing numbers, and each one has created different problems. So this one seems to not want to idle. The last one I did, I had tons of air leak and runnability problems. I didn't even put that on film. The one I did before that you guys saw on film, I blew a crank seal in that one. The first one I did, that one ran the best. It had the most aggressive timing numbers, but it also blew up. So, you guys see what I'm saying? There's no cookie cutting when it comes to these kind of saw builds. There you go. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed just a little, clutch removal and that kind of thing. I like to show you guys what I'm doing, and sometimes I take for granted the things that I do, and I overlook simple things that are maybe of interest to some of you guys. So, that's what we did today. Hope you enjoyed this video. As always, thanks for watching. Take it easy. Later, guys. Nose heavy.